Greetings, littérateurs. That's French for persons who are interested in and knowledgeable about literature. Based on your first engagement with this course this week and the literature, I'd say that just might be an appropriate way to greet you, which leads me to say, so far, so good, and keep up the good work. These video greetings, and I feel a little foolish right this moment, and mini lectures are a regular practice of mine. I've heard from one of you that you appreciate having some FaceTime as well as some context. Hope you all feel that way. I decided to wear this silly hat, my outdoor hat, to commemorate the winter we're having and to celebrate the fact that weather doesn't mess up this opportunity to learn together. It doesn't have much of an impact on us in our journey toward the completion of this course. To the best of my ability to determine, it seems most of us are more or less local, and so you must be enjoying the same weather that I am, although you may not be enjoying the Troutdale breezes the way I am. But on to the subject at hand, week 2. One of the interesting questions that literary scholars often reflect on is one that asks about the relationship between society and the arts, or as might be stated, do the arts operate independently of society, culture, or are they embedded in it? Do they express it? Do they change or shape it? And how does literature figure into all of that? What role do the arts play? So, in part of our work this week, the question would be, did changing societal norms create feminist movement? Or did the feminist movement create change? And again, what's the role of literature or the arts in all of this? From our particular perch in time, it may be hard to imagine the literary world we enter this second week. It may be hard to imagine the sociological or historical world that we enter this week. The focus of this week is on two movements in American culture, society that were, and in many ways actually continue to be very powerful movements that changed the face of our world. The recent presidential elections bear that out. The first is the feminist movement, and the second is the Jazz Age. Both of these ages are connected, actually, and we'll see at the end of my remarks here how they might be thought of as contributing to each other. I think actually that they are kind of chicken and egg influence. It's really hard to tell which came first and which was more influential. While a glass ceiling still exists in many parts of our world, including our own, it's not as thick as it once was. But in the earliest days of the feminist movement in the United States, women were actually, nearly completely disenfranchised. They could not vote. They belonged, I put that in quotes, in the home. They were rarely allowed to be property owners or to have any independent wealth. Their value was seen in marriage and child rearing and bearing and rearing. They were to bear and raise children. In fact, they were their worth was often determined by their ability to produce an heir, preferably, of course, a male heir. The fight to give women the vote, known as the suffrage movement, was illegal and dangerous. In fact, any effort by a woman to be other than the stereotypical woman was met by serious and sustained and often legal resistance. Rebecca West, an Irish writer born in 1892, expressed the sense of many women, especially better educated women, about the state of their world when she wrote, quote, "I only know that people call me a feminist whenever I express sentiments that differentiate me from a doormat or a prostitute," end quote. Feminism in general is understood to be the belief, attitude, actions that work toward women's rights and equality between men and women. A not so tongue-in-cheek definition says that feminism is the radical notion that women are people. Feminism is thought to have flourished in three major time periods in the United States. The first time period was in the late 1800s to early 1900s during the struggle to establish women's right to vote. Suffrage for women was won in 1920. The second major period was during the 60s and 70s when feminists worked on equal pay for equal work, reproductive freedom, and other various related campaigns. Key authors from this second period are Sylvia Plath, Gloria Steinem, and Maya Angelou from the 60s, and Betty Friedan, Kate Millett, Germaine Greer, Erica Young, and Alice Walker from the 70s. The third period is widely debated about when it began, but is thought to have started in the 1990s and it continues up to this day, with a focus on a variety of topics such as sexual freedom, women's autonomy from political restrictions. Key feminist writers from this period are Nora Ephron, Hillary Clinton, Bell Hooks, and Martha Nussbaum. Our three short stories come out of the turn of the century, that turn from the 19th into the 20th century, that is, out of the first period of feminism. And through them, we see a new consciousness beginning to emerge and a new sense of identity, as well as a sense of the state of oppression that many women experienced. In addition to the three writers selected for your reading, you might also recognize Emily Dickinson and Edna St. Vincent Millay as artists and poets of this era. If this is the discussion topic you select, and remember you only have to pick one of the two, then I really encourage you to read the three short stories before you read the material in Chapter 10. Yes, this chapter provides you with a good contextual analysis and presentation of the cultural, sociological, and familial realities of this time period, especially for women. But I would like you to read these stories from within your own journey and your own sense of personhood. Once you've read the three of them, then, as a kind of afterthought, or maybe we might say a kind of research, read the introductory material. See the cultural context through the stories and not the stories through the cultural context or the cultural analysis. The Jazz Age is the other significant movement under consideration for this week. If you plan to read Fitzgerald's Babylon Revisited, I want to offer you the same advice that I provided for the feminist readings. Read the short story first before you read the background and contextual material and analysis in Chapter 11. The Jazz Age is chronologically connected with the 1920s and is the time in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world when jazz is really discovered and becomes cross-cultural and multidimensional. It's a time of perhaps its greatest popularity and perhaps its greatest influence. Writers from this period include Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, Zora Neale Hurston, three writers that we'll talk about when we consider the Harlem Renaissance later in the course. This period also produced Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck, and of course, F. Scott Fitzgerald. These two emphases, feminism and jazz, are connected and mutually influential. The growth of the Jazz Age, which ended abruptly with the Great Depression, produces a whole new understanding of women, often summarized and perhaps stereotyped as the flapper. As one source indicated, quote, flappers were a new breed of young Western women in the 1920s who wore short skirts, bobbed their hair, listened to jazz, and flaunted their disdain for what was then considered acceptable behavior. Flappers were seen as brash because they wore excessive makeup. They were drinking, treating sex in a casual manner, smoking, driving automobiles, and otherwise flaunting sexual and social norms. Feminism was still a long way from where we might think we are today, but because of this age, because of the flapper and jazz and the literature of this era, the glass ceiling was growing thinner. Well, enough of an introduction for now. This has gone on for quite a while. But I do want to say, by the way, that some of you have yet to go online and introduce yourself. I hope you will do that. I enjoy reading those introductions. Helps me feel that I know you a little bit better. And then I invite you to read each other's introductions. It's hard to build a community online, but we can work at it. Looking forward to our continuing conversation. Talk to you again in about a week.